big story this week. Ministers are facing calls to relax abortion laws after a woman was jailed for carrying out a late-term termination.
The baby was between 32 to 34 weeks, well past Britain's legal limit of 24 weeks. She took pills which to induce the child. She's got sentenced for 28 days. We've got with us Emma Webb, of course, director of the Common Sense Society, and Stephen Pound. Emma, you've got really strong views on this. Because Rishi Sunak, number 10, has ruled out any change to abortion law. She was sentenced under an 1851 law.
I mean, a child that is between 32 and 34 weeks, even if you are, whether you are someone who is pro-life from conception or whether you are somebody who has a moderate view on abortion, so, for example, other countries in Europe, they have a 12-week limit on abortion. Ours is 24 weeks. That's actually at the most liberal end.
Well, you can have an abortion up until term, remember that. In this country, with the right medical, under extremely rare circumstances.
And you also can if the child has something like Down syndrome, which I think is absolutely abhorrent because, I mean, there's a whole other debate to be had there about the fact that Down syndrome children are being discriminated against in the world.
It's outraged people because she's a mother of 3 children, one of whom's got special needs, so they've lost their mother now. We don't know what's happening to those 3 kids. 28 months in prison. Do you think that was too severe?
If anything, I think it's probably on the lenient side, and I know that a lot of people will be very offended by that. And I think that I can totally understand why people would sympathise with her situation during lockdown. She moved back in with her former partner. The baby was somebody else's child. You can sympathise with, who knows what was going on in that domestic situation. It's not to say that you don't recognise that there was probably something terrible going on for her psychologically at that time, but that doesn't mean that you can kill a child. A child that is between 32 and 34 weeks is a viable baby, that is a human life. If the child had been born and there was a horrible situation during lockdown and a mother had murdered her own baby, and that would be infanticide, you wouldn't therefore say, well, the mother was having a hard time. I'm sorry, but you have to have certain protections, whether you're anti-abortion full stop or whether you have a reasonable moderate view on abortion. After 24 weeks, the reason why the line is there in the law is because that is a viable baby, that is a human life, and your reproductive rights as a woman do not extend, and your bodily autonomy, I have to say, does not extend to murdering another life.
I obviously completely disagree, because the risk, if there's anything that we learnt during the pandemic, it is the idea that bodily autonomy, what you decide to do with your body as a sentient adult human female, must trump all other laws, governments, regulations, and this story is tragic.
But what about the bodily autonomy of the child? Does the child not have a right to its own bodily autonomy?
But Emma, if you take that to its logical conclusion, and if we are living under a government who decides that if you get pregnant, you as the woman, your rights are irrelevant now. That child's life trumps your human sentient existence. I think that the sentence was way too harsh. I mean, it's over, to care about the unborn child, wonderful. But what about the 3 children who are left at home
it's also
without their mother?
They,
at that point, are more important.
Yep.
But the well-being of those 3 children left at home...
What do you think? This is always difficult.
This is an horrific act.
This is not The Handmaid's Tale here. We're talking about a person making choice. Look, we have in this country, we have a compromise which is very painful for a great many people. There are very, very strong views. You've expressed yours. And I think, Emma, God love you, I think where you actually expressed the sympathy was very, very impressive, because there's no good news in this story.
No.
There's nothing good for any single person involved in it. But look, we have a compromise whereby 24 weeks is the limit. And I think we have to respect that. We have to respect that 24. And
under any circumstance?
No, of course not. If the health of the mother is so dangerous, and you know and I know that there can be a termination up to half an hour beforehand if the mother's going to die.
Yes, that's right.
And which is one of the problems we didn't have in Northern Ireland.
There was no health issue with this mother.
Yeah.
She decided she didn't want it, partly because she hadn't brought her to tell the partner it wasn't his child.
Yeah. And the other fact is that the abortifacients that she took were illegally obtained anyway.
So should she have gone to prison?
Yeah. I think she has to, because the law is the law.
But what about those 3
For
children?
28 months?
Yeah.
28 months?
28, well, she'll be out in, what, 6
14.
months?
No, but what about those 3 children who were at home without their mother?
Yeah, but
my heart breaks for them.
But Bev, you could say that about any single case, any single woman who
she's no threat to the pub. She's no threat to the public. This woman poses no threats to
what do
anybody.
those children think anyway? Those 3 children who know that their sibling has been killed. I say, what does it impact
Well,
on
I'd
them?
like to think that they would understand that their mother was under extreme pressure at 44 years old with 3 children, one of them with significant learning needs, in a very complicated, what sounds like a romantic situation, that she'd got herself into a terrible mess where she didn't know who was the father of this child. And I'm sorry, my sympathies extend to the people who are alive. Of course, it is awful that that baby wasn't conceived in different circumstances.
Why should the baby that has been allowed by the mother to get so far along, why should that baby be the collateral damage of what is, admittedly, possibly, we don't know very much about the domestic situation, a tragic situation for those involved, including the children, because, as Stephen said, it's their sibling that has been killed here.
And the sex with the partner was consensual. It's not as if there was a rape involved here, or
the decision.
But you can't.
No,
But that's punishing morality. That's punishing her for her moral choice, and I have a huge issue with that, because none of us are morally
but
whiter than white.
none of us have the right, in whatever tricky situation, to murder another person. And the argument for bodily autonomy extends to respecting other people's right to live. And that baby, like I said, whether you take a liberal view on abortion or whether you take an absolute pro-life view on abortion, that was a baby. There are many, many people who have been... Of course, there are lots of people who have been responding in offence at this, but there are many, many people who have been saying, I was born earlier than that baby was terminated and I survived and I've lived a good life.
But what you are asking that woman to do is to give birth to a child that is not wanted. And we need to live in a world where as many children as possible...
But why didn't she
We have to live in a world where as many children as possible are born to parents who want them, because children who are not wanted live often, not always, but much less happy lives.
Is there not a point also, if the court didn't take this position, other mothers may take the same decision, that they can end the pregnancy at 35 weeks, 36 weeks, just because they don't want it?
You do not factor that into that situation.
I think your point about the people being wanted, when crime went down in New York in the 1970s and 1980s, everybody thought it was to do with Rudy Giuliani. In fact, it's to do with Roe v. Wade. It's because a huge number of unwanted children were not being born, and that was, it's actually demonstrable. But I would say that most children in this country are wanted. I mean, there are huge numbers of children awaiting adoption, awaiting fostering. We know that. But I know so many people, so many young children who were brought up by foster parents or adopted, who've had very, very happy.
And there are also many women who are pressured by their partners into having an abortion. Like I said, we don't know the domestic situation with this lady. But if you will say that the logic, that the precedent this sets, has the result of eroding women's rights all the way back to conception, surely you can see that if you were to give this woman a lenient punishment, the logic goes in the opposite direction of not upholding the law, and then lots of babies, viable children, having their lives terminated, and that being something that, someone could be pressured into by their partner.